The year is 2015. Jon Snow is dead, Hamilton ended racism and helped us understand that the Founding Fathers were incredibly lit, actually, and Hotline Bling swept across the nation, becoming an instant favorite among pickup artists, ex-boyfriends, and guys who called their 2003 Nissan Altima the Pussy Wagon. They were simpler times. It was before President Trump, before Russia invaded Ukraine, and before a massive, life-ruining pandemic swept across the planet, changing life as we knew it, because although it feels like we've been living in this hell forever, Fortnite only came out in 2017.
What are you doing? Just shoot him! What is this game?
Life was good. But it was about to get significantly less good in the greatest city in the country. That's right, Spokane, Washington. The president of the Spokane chapter of the NAACP alleged that she was being terrorized by a string of devastating hate crimes. Between scraps of nooses left in her backyard, anonymous threatening letters, and an alleged sign pointing to her house that said, Niger, she had reported not one, not two, not three, but 9 separate hate crimes allegedly targeting her and her children. The thing is, details weren't adding up. A local journalist named Jeff Humphrey uncovered a truth that was so outrageous that it would send shockwaves throughout the entire country. A con so maniacal, so evil that the discourse trying to untangle it would go on for years. Interviewing the woman, Humphrey raised the point that a police officer had noticed one of the threatening letters had no stamp or mark from the post office. Almost like nobody had sent it to her. Almost like the woman had written the letter herself. He led her along expertly, growing her trust, letting her drop her guard, letting her talk about the near dozen hate crimes she claimed to be a victim of, all the while building up to the moment that he would question her about a piece of evidence that he had in his jacket pocket. A piece of evidence that was so devastating that it would end this woman's career immediately. That piece of evidence? A picture of her father. What follows might be one of the most devastating, outrageous, shocking got-you moments that I've ever seen on TV.
Actually, he has, unfortunately, has bone cancer and was not able to get cleared for surgery, and so.
God, that sounds like a terrible break for you. I'm sure that he would have been very proud of you. Is that your dad?
Yeah, that's my dad.
This man right here is your father? Right there?
You have a question about that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I was wondering if your dad really is an African-American man.
That's a very, I don't know what you're implying.
Are you African-American?
I don't understand the question of, I did tell you that, yes, that's my dad. And he was unable to come in January.
Are your parents, are they white?
That's right, Rachel Dolezal wasn't just white, she was whitey white. A blonde-haired, freckly Yakubian queen who'd been running a con on everybody in Spokane for years. She climbed to the top of the local NAACP while wearing braids and what someone who's not afraid of being sued might call blackface, but what I will call also blackface, dude! Jesus Christ! She lied for decades about having black parents, about being born in a teepee in Africa, continuing the con for years, but finally, the jig was up. She was ousted from the local NAACP and left a furious and outraged community in her wake. This is where the story would normally end, but a true great con artist would rather die than give up the con, and Rachel saw an out.
I'm not giving up the story.
She was caught red-handed, but this was 2015. And guess what happened 5 weeks before and was still first and foremost in America's mind? That's right. Caitlyn Jenner announced that she was transitioning and was on the cover of like every single newspaper, magazine, front story, and every channel all across America. After trans women of color like Janet Mock and Laverne Cox had been laying the groundwork for decades with ceaseless hard work and activism, finally finally, an already famous, incredibly wealthy white Republican was ready to somersault into the position of being the most famous, most recognizable trans person of all time. Rachel saw this and went, well, I've just been fired. Everybody hates me. Looks like I'm screwed. Everybody knows that I'm white now, but... Wait, white, trans, black, white, race, gender, transgender, good now, trans, people support trans. Wait, what if I said that this wasn't a long con? What if there's an out? What if I said that I was dun dun dun?
You've sent mixed signals over the years. Are you an African-American woman?
I identify as black. I wasn't born this way, but this is who I really am. I identify as black, so I am part of the Pan-African diaspora.
Last time, I think the term transracial, trans-black.
Do you like the term trans-black?
Dolezal was just the latest in a centuries-long line of racial con artists and hucksters, but was, as far as I can see, the first person in human history to identify as transracial. While many people pointed out the clear con here, other stations covered her as a sensationalist news story. Somebody who claimed to be born black. Somebody who claimed that even as a kid, she drew herself using dark brown crayons. A story which, like basically everything else that she said, was later proven to be false.
This just simply didn't happen. She didn't ever draw herself as an African American.
What elevated this from National Enquirer Maury-level outrage story, however, was the time and place that she chose to do it. Through her persistent con, she gave the greatest imaginable gift to conservative anchors across the country, who saw the clear con going on here, but salivated as they realized that they could now conflate Rachel's clear, singular, obvious lie with every one of the millions and millions of transgender people throughout the world.
I think that the Time Person of the Year at this point is undoubtedly going to be Caitlyn Jenner. And then I think she'll probably protest that she's the Person of the Year instead of the Woman of the Year. But I think in the second position will be Rachel Dolezal. Those are the two people who I would say at this point in the early running for Times Person of the Year.
They have a shot.
See, once you accept identity cross-dressing, we can all play along.
Astounding to me is to hear people make excuses for mental disorder.
But I thank Rachel. By exposing the limits of identity politics, she reveals the absurdity of those who cling to it.
The title of that clip from Greg Gutfeld is literally "Thank You, Rachel Dolezal." And it does feel like a gift, considering these people's sole political agenda is to make you think that every single transgender person on Earth is a degenerate child molester so that they can distract you from things like maybe asking for health care or to get paid more money or to maybe make education a little better. No, you gotta focus on transgender people. They're like demons. They're like Rachel Dolezal. Their point being, yes, Rachel Dolezal is clearly a sick maniac freak, and she's just like all of these allegedly transgender people. What is this? I don't know what I'm doing. It'd be like if after Ellen DeGeneres came out in 1997, a few weeks later, another famous actress came out being like, yes, I too am a lesbian, except I direct all of my sexual urges towards female babies, female animals, and female baby animals. And then conservatives across the country would have their sloppiest, wettest dreams fulfilled, as they would be able to conflate the two for decades. Dolezal gave flesh and form to an outrageous hypothetical that otherwise only would have existed as some slippery slope punchline from people like Piers Morgan or Tucker Carlson. In crafting this lie, Dolezal managed to slip a poison pill into trans discourse from the start of its nationwide inception that hasn't and may never go away. And although Rachel was the first person to lie about being transracial, she would not be the last. Hey, but Pax, Jimmy, Jimbo, Jimothy, James, you claim to be a progressive person. I know it's inconvenient and harmful, but what if this actually is her lived reality? You can't know for sure that she doesn't feel this way. What if transracial people have been among us forever and Well, we just didn't know about it. How is it possible for you to say that somebody's lived identity is invalid? Or that they're being dishonest about their experience? Couldn't it be possible? I mean, even if it's very rare, but couldn't it be possible that some people out there truly are transracial? The short answer is no, but the long answer? No.
So very controversial.
Big up the whole island, massive. It's your boy Chatana.
People think that there's self-hate with me, and there is no self-hate. I don't hate myself. I hate white people. Telling me, that they was gonna hang me with my coons, that I was a nigga lover.
Race. And even if it could be saved, you can't save it because you're not black.
My eyes done to make my eyes more almond shaped.
And you put the Korean injection in me, I feel Korean. Wow.
I also want to call out all these white New Yorkers who waited 4 hours with us to be able to speak and then did not yield their time to black and brown indigenous New Yorkers who thought that their sense of...
Everybody who's watching this, who is a person of color, are going to say, it's not just skin deep. I mean, it's...
Being black is so gross and ugly.
You
Americans don't have feelings because they're not people.
I actually was talking to one of my sons yesterday, and he said, Mom, racially, you're human, and culturally, you're black.
So this is a topic that has fascinated me and infuriated me for a really long time. And I've been researching this forever, so I thought it's finally time to put out a big-ass comprehensive video on the transracial phenomenon. We're going to be diving into the history of racial con artists, their evolution into self-proclaimed transracial people, and the philosophical arguments for and mostly against this phenomenon. This is going to be a fun one, but get ready because this is going to be some of the craziest shit you've ever heard in your entire life. It's going to be shocking, upsetting, aggravating, hilarious, mind-melting stuff, but I've got your back, and we are going to come out of this stronger on the other end. So, before we dive into the term transracial as Rachel Dolezal meant it, we need to first explain what the term transracial actually means because, shocker, it's actually a term with a very long history that super duper duper does not mean what Rachel Dolezal wants you to think that it means. So for decades, the term transracial has been used to describe very real experiences. So we're gonna break this down etymologically. I'm gonna explain what the word means. That said, put on your college 500 level Megamind super brain harness because this is gonna be incredibly complicated. Ready? So, trans, meaning across, beyond, or through. And racial, meaning racial. Boom, transracial. Congratulations, baby. You're ready to graduate. I'm so proud of you. I'm gonna treat you to Applebee's. It's the whitest thing I've ever said. So for decades, the term transracial has been used to describe primarily transracial adoption, in which somebody who is a member of one race is adopted into a family of a different race. And their family becomes, ergo, transracial. It's a complicated, fascinating topic with tons of nooks and crannies and highs and lows, and I can't cover the topic nearly as well as some other creatives have. I'm going to link the following videos in the description, but if you're interested in hearing more on transracial in this sense, I would highly recommend that you check out this excellent video from Kat Black interviewing Rebecca Hudson on being adopted into a white family called Being Raised Transracial. I'd also recommend the Adopting a Child of a Different Race TED Talk by Indigenous author and activist Susan Devon Harness, and although not directly about adoption, the What I Am Learning from My White Grandchildren talk given by author and educator Anthony Peterson. Now, although it's less common, you're also going to sometimes hear transracial being used to talk about the mixed race experience, and coming from a mixed race household. It's a really inflammatory title, but I highly recommend you check out Fab Socialism's video, If Sweetie is Black, Then I Am a Super Negro. The video is much more even-handed with the topic than the title would suggest, and Tiana handles the topic in a very considered way. Finally, you'll sometimes see, and I'm talking about like very rarely here, but you'll sometimes hear the term interracial being brought up to describe being raised in a atypical racial community. Still of note, none of these people are people who are actually claiming to be black, but I highly recommend you check out the excellent Channel 5 documentary on the Hoff twins. This really wholesome interview with somebody's white Jamaican father that always really makes me smile. I'm gonna link a little bit of the video here.
The people. Jamaican people are the warmest, kind-hearted people in the whole world. You can meet anybody on the street, just chat to them, and they talk to you, they don't really care who you are, where you come from, what you look like.
And then there's That Jamaican Dad's evil, bizarro, younger twin version, Tom Hanks' son, Chet Hanks. Chet Hanks grew up with white parents in a white community, identifies as white, has in no way had a diverse or transracial experience, but somehow felt like it would be a good idea to do this at the Golden Globes and in almost every public appearance since.
Big up the whole island, massive. It's your boy Chetana. Me drop one big tune right now upon SoundCloud. Link in bio. Go listen now.
Jesus Christ, man. Come on. Of note here is that none of these people, except Chet, are pretending to be anything other than they actually are. They may have had a transracial experience, but again, it's a completely different thing than the standalone, stuck in the wrong race since birth narrative that Rachel Dolezal wants you to think that it is. I'm not going to be talking much about the legitimate discourse surrounding actual transracial experiences, as the term had been used before 2015, you know, as a descriptor and not as a transgender-esque racial identity category. Because some of the previously listed creators can speak on that topic better than I ever could, and I highly recommend that you check them out. What I can speak on, however, is identity, transness, and gender, because 2015 was when I was in the middle of getting my degree in gender studies. And sweet RuPaul's teats, man, having Rachel Dolezal and Caitlyn Jenner dropped on us within a few weeks of each other in 2015, it resulted in a buffet of hot takes, the likes of which has never been seen before or since. But here's the thing. Sociologists and gender studies people have been in the discourse dojo forever, learning how to spot bad actors. Our chief opponents usually being pedophiles. They're like our Team Rocket, popping up every season and doing some crazy shit before getting yeeted back up into the stratosphere. Black activists start the NAACP. Well, pedophiles start NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. Gay activists gain a foothold in popular opinion. Well, suddenly pedophiles are saying, well, I like boys, and boys are a type of man, so I like men. Where's my acceptance? Where's my award? Give me that kid. Trans activists start winning popular opinion. Well, suddenly pedophiles are identifying as trans age, saying, oh, well, I'm actually an 8-year-old inside, and coincidentally, I want to be inside of an 8-year-old. Jesus, please don't clip that. Of note here is that Pedo Team Rocket doesn't make these arguments in good faith. They're pretending that these are stances they have or identities they hold so that, like Team Rocket, they can take a Pikachu.
No, I'm sorry.
So we've developed a good barometer for BS, but that said, having a well-attuned bad faith radar doesn't actually help you prove that somebody is lying about their experience or their claimed identity. It just points towards what situations warrant a closer look. And unfortunately, when it comes to being transracial, people have a difficulty giving good reasons for why being transgender is a worthwhile, respectable identity, but being transracial probably isn't. After all, they're both social constructs, aren't they? T1J responded to this in his excellent Transracial Revisited video by saying that,
but honestly, I haven't really heard many compelling answers to this question. Seems like people usually just reject it out of hand and refuse to engage it, or automatically assume foul play and self-interest. Is it just another example of goons on the internet calling people transphobic and racist without actually providing any constructive arguments? That's not out of character for social media, as we know.
T1J goes on to talk about why exactly race isn't like gender in this case. He cites great articles and, as always, is wonderfully insightful. But he points to a greater question, which is that fundamentally, people have a hard time grappling with the subject in meaningful ways that aren't just dismissing the subject altogether or mocking the person. Most of us, when hearing about transracial identified people, have an instinct to call it a scam, or to think that those donning the identity are idiots and assholes unworthy of being engaged with seriously, and like, hey, fair enough. Many people, however, in trying to spell out what exactly is wrong here, find that, well, it's tougher than you expect. A friend of mine who knew I was passionate about this topic sent me this conversation between secular talk host Kyle Kalinske and a streamer named Vosh, which I think illuminates how a lot of people feel about the subject.
I have to say, my instinct is that I really don't see what's wrong with it. I really think, is it possible, if we agree, and I don't know if you agree with this, in terms of how people perceive race, that's real as a heart attack. And that's why there's discrimination and prejudice and xenophobia and bigotry and all that stuff. But if race mostly is a social construct, and it is, well then, why can't somebody feel like they're more of another race or another culture? So my gut reaction was transgenderism, totally get it. Transracialism, I kind of get it.
Now, Kyle seems like a well-meaning progressive person, and the conversation that happens here is actually pretty good. It's a wide-ranging conversation getting into all sorts of different identity categories, and Kyle clearly came with an open mind. Mr. Vosh does a good job articulating some points, but I find that he struggles on others. At one point, he frames it as gender being biological and cultural versus race just being cultural, but it's a comparison that doesn't exactly stick the landing when you think about how many transgender people do not transition medically or physically, and in general, the topic just kind of slips out of their hands a little bit. Kyle eventually goes on to express a frustration that a lot of people have, as him and Mr. Vosh struggle on certain transracial versus transgender talking points, like the idea that claiming a marginalized identity without growing and having the experience of being that identity therefore invalidates your claim to that identity.
Against discrimination along the lines of your race, which if you're white, pretending to be black might not be as applicable. But at the same time, TERFs make that argument about trans women, that you can't be a real woman because the first 18 years of your life or so were set enjoying male privilege. So
that's what I struggled with, Vosh, is that every time I thought about the transracial issue, I couldn't think of an objection that wouldn't also apply to trans issues. And I was like, well, no, I know for a fact transgenderism is real. I know it.
Kyle's frustration is real, and I know a lot of seriously smart people who struggle with this topic. I know that I used to be one of them. I want to have a silver bullet of facts and logic against this, but arguing against the concept of transracial people feels like you're fighting the fucking copy ninja. Gender is a social construct. Race is a social construct. Most trans people feel like they were born trans. I feel like I was born Dominican. How could you say that? Would you question a trans woman like that? No, because trans people often take great pains through medical and social transition. Oh, so you're only a valid trans person if you medically transition? No, that's not what I mean. You can't claim you're African American as an adult without having experienced the generational trauma and marginalization that serves as the foundation on which American cultural blackness has been forged. So a trans woman wouldn't be legitimate if she hadn't suffered under misogyny as a child? No, this is different. How? You're co-opting an identity that isn't yours. You're doing blackface and making a mockery of real trans people. Would you say that a trans woman's existence is mocking that of real women? You sound like a bigot. Stop! These are different things! Prove it. This is a lie. You're clearly trolling. You wouldn't say that to a transgender person. Checkmate, bigot! Now, plenty of people have tried to tackle the subject in a more academic way. Soon after Rachel Dolezal launched her transracial claim, a very controversial article came out in renowned feminist journal Hypatia. It's called In Defense of Transracialism by Rebecca Tuval. It's basically a white academic replaying the transracial copy ninja battle for 16 pages. And it really only serves to demonstrate how confused people get on the topic. Tuval is clearly coming at it from a place of wanting to be progressive and open-minded, but like many well-meaning white allies, does not stick the landing. The events that followed the publication in peer review of In Defense of Transracialism sparked a controversy so huge that it almost took down Hypatia itself. Other folks would go on to take a swing at the good old transracial discourse, like sociologist Rogers Brubacher, whose 2016 book Trans, Gender and Race in an Age of Unsettled Identities is like, okay, but it's mostly an account of how gender and race are totally like social constructs, dude. We're living in the future. Now, it's not impossible to dive into the matter intellectually. And for my money, the best paper on the topic is Tina Fernandez-Bott's Race and Method, the Tuval Affair. It's a pretty great refutation of some of the points made in Defense of Transracialism. Botts is a really good writer, and it's no surprise that as a woman of color, she's much more inclined to see the situation with a clearer head as to what's really going on here. The paper makes some really devastating critiques of Tuval, spelling out how, again, just because race and gender are social constructs does not mean that they're socially constructed in the same way. Just because two things share one trait does not mean they share every single trait. The metaphysical concept of an attack helicopter is also a social construct. But when we see somebody using the only jokes that conservatives have been telling for the past 15 years on the internet, I sexually identify as an attack helicopter, well, we all know that we actually have very good reason not to treat that claim with the seriousness and respect that we do those of transgender people. Botts ultimately concludes that the concept of being transracial is both unintelligible and fantastical, which is like, it's just such a good line, man. And I recommend you read the paper because it shows that it is possible to engage with this topic in a serious way. That said, Botts is a very clear writer for an academic, but this thing still is an academic paper. And if you're not used to this style of an academic paper or familiar with the terminology, you might still have a difficult time parsing it. Her points are intellectually thorough, but they're not the kind of points that would be useful to just sum up here. You need all 22 pages to see her build up the idea, stress test the idea, and support it. Now, not everybody has the time or patience to read a 22-page academic paper on the subject, especially because when you're talking with a person who's seeking to mock transgender people by waving hypothetical transracial people in your face, you want some quick ways to tackle this shit, and I think that I have finally cracked the code on how to do that. More on that in part 4. But that said, no matter how good the arguments are against treating transracial people seriously, we need to do what most people, when talking about the topic, neglect to do. People often want to find these intellectual magic bullets against a situation that they're uncomfortable with. Entering the brain palace and charging up the psychic blast to own and destroy your whole belief system, man. You need to step into the debate zone, get ready to get owned and obliterated, destroyed with facts and logic. Your hypocrisy laid bare. Rhetorical fallacies, logical fallacies flying everywhere. Ad hominem, reducto absurdum, no true Scotsman fallacy. Gah!
James! Snap out of it!
Hey, but wait a second, man. Those arguments do exist, but before we start busting out our philosophical Keki Genkai ancient bloodline techniques, we need to touch grass and engage with this subject on a much more basic level. Instead of skipping way ahead to start attacking the soul of the matter, we gotta do the fun part, which is taking a look at the reality of the matter. Who are these people claiming to be transracial? Do even they believe what they're saying? I can't look into their souls and weigh them out Anubis style, but we can look at their stories and come to some very interesting conclusions. And, oh boy, this is definitely the fun part.
Ah, yes, you merely adopted the white nonsense, Batman. But I was born in the white nonsense, molded by it. And now, I'm Puerto Rican. What am I doing, man?
All right, let's fucking go, man. Let's get goofy with it, dude. So, who are these transracial people and what are their stories? What are their lived experiences? I gotta know. So you may have seen these people pop up every year or two. New outrageous stories and claims, but it turns out that when you look at who they are, even less of them claim the transracial title than you might think. Racial con artists are, in a sense, as American as apple pie. They've been with us for hundreds of years. Think back to the Boston Tea Party, where upwards of 130 members of the Sons of Liberty darkened their skin and dressed up as Mohawk warriors in order to pin a ton of domestic terrorism on a subjugated racial group that they were currently genociding. I think America might be bad, guys. Now, much of the early colonial period in America also coincided with what many scholars call the invention of whiteness, in which colonial powers pushed for a consolidated identification of Western Europeans as white, a racial category which actually simply didn't exist beforehand. This served as a tool to help consolidate capital amongst ruling class Europeans while stoking enough fear and anxiety and xenophobia in poor working class Europeans to redirect their anger away from those pulling the strings and towards the black and brown people whose land, lives, and blood served as kindling in the furnaces of colonialism. It's pretty fucked up. Now, over the years, this new racial category and these new racial dynamics started to shift and mold and harden and reform in different and increasingly terrifying ways. Every few years, new patch notes would drop. Racial categories would shift. Irish and Italians got buffed in this patch. They're white now. Persians got smacked with the Nerf hammer. They're now in D tier in the phrenology meta, all leading to the creation and maintenance of white supremacist superstructures throughout the globe. It used to be in fashion to say that race was real but didn't matter, but our understanding now in 2022 is more along the lines that race isn't real, but like it or not, does matter. We've weighed the concept down with so much history and so much trauma that now we need to live with the consequences. And amidst all of that, throughout American history, some people have looked at all of this pain and history and trauma and seen an opportunity not to uplift the voices of the marginalized, but to co-opt them for profit. Now, of note here is that not everybody seeking to be seen as a different race is necessarily a bad actor. That might sound crazy, but hear me out. When the US government started implementing laws surrounding the rights and treatments of indigenous people, many tribes were forced to follow certain blood quantum laws, in which you wouldn't be considered indigenous unless your blood was a certain percentage Indian. Even today, the Department of the Interior issues what is called a certified degree of Indian blood, a card which functions similarly to an ID. Many tribes have criticized this practice for many reasons, which you could read more about here. But more tribes are starting to shirk the practice, switching to different lineage methods, or in some cases, even allowing new members who have no indigenous blood at all if they grew up in the community and have become greatly integrated in it and follow certain steps to gain approval. Similarly, between the 18th and mid-20th centuries, many African Americans and mixed race people sought to be seen as solely white. Like blood quantum, many states had so-called one-drop rules that made it so you would be subject to insanely harsh segregation laws if you had even one black ancestor. So an example of this that I'm fond of is that you all probably went to school hearing about how Thomas Jefferson had sired a bunch of kids with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings. That sounds bad enough, right? We all know that that's bad. The situation, however, was even weirder than that. So Jefferson's wife, Martha, died pretty young, and allegedly she asked him not to remarry so that the children wouldn't have a stepmother. Now, Sally Hemings was not just a slave kept by Jefferson and Martha. Sally was Martha's half-sister. They shared a father, and Sally herself was only a quarter black. One of the reasons that Jefferson kept her around, all the while refusing to give her his freedom, is that he could take her places because she was white passing. By the time Thomas started popping out multiple children with his wife's half-sister, Sally, those children themselves were 1/8 black, called at that time octoroons. And they still lived their entire lives enslaved by the Jefferson family. So for all the Thomas Jefferson apologia going on out there, this is a dude who banged his own deceased wife's half-sister and then enslaved all of the children that he had with his wife's half-sister. It's a little problematic. It's giving toxic vibes. Been in Paris meeting lots of different ladies. I guess I basically enslaved all my kids. Traveled the wide, wide world and came back to my slaves. Back to my slaves. It's so weird that Hamilton left all this out. So understanding the historical context, you could totally see why some people would seek to be totally white passing in order to escape this fucking nightmare scenario. There's a lot of excellent scholarship on this, the best, in my opinion, being A Chosen Exile by Allison Hobbs. Many scholars have written about what some African American and mixed people sought to gain by passing as white, But very few scholars considered what was also lost in the process, and Hobbes weaves these two together brilliantly. The book is packed with brilliant and heartbreaking stories like that of Elsie Roxborough, the one-time girlfriend of Langston Hughes. Elsie eventually mailed Langston Hughes a letter with no return address or information on it, saying that she was changing her name to Mona Manet and intended to, quote, cease being colored. When she died a few years later of suicide, only her white-appearing relatives claimed to collect her body, quote, allowing her to remain white even in death. These situations are just like devastating, and they're not what we're focusing on today. The racial con artists that we're going to be looking at today are those who co-opted marginalized identities for profit, those who have lied about the material realities of their history and identity, who have often served as spokespeople for communities they've pretended to be a part of. So let's take a look at them. Let's look at what they did and how, if ever, they got found out, and how this all ultimately leads to the transracial people that we're talking about today. Starting with some faces that might be recognizable to you, let's talk about once famed indigenous activist and conservationist, Grey Owl. Grey Owl was lauded for his efforts in fighting fur traders and trappers. He also made the equivalent of millions off of his 3 books, The Men of the Last Frontier, Pilgrims of the Wild, and The Adventures of Sajo and Her Beaver People, along with countless speaking tours. He was actually a white man who had been cosplaying as a Native American since his early 30s, and though some publications were onto him, it was only after he had passed away from a battle with extreme alcoholism and pneumonia that exposés finally started being released, calling out his real identity. His con is made all the more impressive considering he had what might be the whitest name I've heard in my entire life, Archibald Stansfeld Bellany, which is like the Caucasian equivalent of naming your child Tyrone Washington. I do know somebody with that name. And Ty, if you're watching, I'm sorry for nothing, man. Mr. Archibald Stansfeld Bellany was also the Nick Cannon of his time, marrying and impregnating at least 6 different women. So, hey, at least there's something cool about him. Grey Owl is part of a long line of what some indigenous activists call pretendians, often highly educated, melanin-deficient men and women who claim indigenous heritage for clout and prestige, but who are, in reality, anywhere from 99 to 8,000% white. And people like Grey Owl take away from the hard work of real indigenous activists, like perhaps the most well-known indigenous figure of all time, American icon Iron Eyes Cody, who appeared in over 100 TV shows and movies, most iconically the crying Indian environmentalist ad that you may have seen in history textbooks. He was a real hero, and pretendians like Grey Owl make it so that all the hard work and blood and sweat and tears of, wait a second, computer enhance a little bit, give me some color, and oh, god damn it! Yes, Iron Eyes Cody, born Espera Oscar de Corti, was in fact 100% Sicilian. He pretended in public and, as the years went on, even in private, to be a member of the Cherokee and Cree tribes, although details of his tribe and place of birth and biography changed all the time as the years went on. He started wearing his Hollywood Indian costumes in day-to-day life and became the icon of Native American imagery all throughout the 1900s. Now, in the 80s and 90s, other indigenous leaders would begin to emerge, many of them women, and would begin to finally start to wind back some of the damage wrought by pretendians. Leading the charge were brave indigenous women like Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, who you may mistakenly believe is white, but who is in fact...
Wrong. Guess again.
Oh wait, god damn it! Before you come at me, yes, it is okay to like things about Elizabeth Warren. Many people treat criticizing her native claims as a red flag because when Donald Trump exclusively referred to her as Pocahontas and offered to pay her $1 million to prove her indigenous heritage through a DNA test, it felt like most things that Trump said, which is to say, incredibly racist. The thing is, Donald Trump was extremely correct on this one point, because most people have no idea the extent to which Warren profited from her claimed native heritage throughout her life. Throughout Warren's political career, she weaved stories about how her parents' marriage was rejected by racist grandparents because of her mother's Cherokee ancestry. She'd say that despite it being a constant pressure in the family, her native roots were a core part of her identity and something to be celebrated. In 1986, when filling out her registration for the Texas Bar Association, she listed American Indian as her race. After identifying as a minority, she landed a position at the University of Pennsylvania, going on to get a job at Harvard Law, where she was publicized as the first woman of color ever hired by Harvard Law. This was during a time when Harvard was under major pressure for its decision to give tenure to 4 white men back to back to back to back. And to help calm the protests and controversy, Harvard made sure to widely publicize Elizabeth Warren's hiring. Meanwhile, Warren was also making her identity clear in writing, like her multiple contributions to a real cookbook, and I am not making this up, called Pow Wow Chow, where she seems to identify solely as Cherokee. And Warren's recipes were also surprisingly mayonnaise heavy for supposedly original American indigenous fare, but hey, who am I to say? I'm not an expert. They were also almost definitely entirely plagiarized from a previously published French chef's near identical recipes and instructions. Surprisingly, Pow Wow Chow did not get a sequel. She would go on to weave her native roots into many, many speeches on the campaign trail throughout her senatorial and presidential campaigns. So when Trump started mocking her as Pocahontas, she was eager to prove him wrong. She dropped a surprise 5-minute-long video in which she interviewed multiple family members and spoke with a geneticist who had taken a sample of Warren's DNA. It's an incredibly painful watch, culminating in a final bomb that she hoped would destroy Trump once and for all. It destroyed someone. Finally, at the end, the geneticist revealed that the test showed that Elizabeth Warren actually had a ton of native ancestry. That is, if you consider maybe being 1/2048th indigenous, a ton of native ancestry. Cherokee genealogist Twyla Barnes would go on to say that, as far as she could see, there was no evidence of Cherokee ancestry in Warren's history. Now, the results were immediate, and the fact that Warren chose to release the video, despite knowing the results, and chose to treat it as a win, only served to pour more fuel on the fire that would eventually go on to sink that presidential campaign, with Trump dancing mockingly on the ashes.
Pocahontas, Pocahontas, Pocahontas. I mean, Pocahontas, Elizabeth Warren, seriously.
Now, Warren may have been part of the legion of Americans, both black and white, who bought into apocryphal family lore about supposed native ancestry. But she nonetheless claimed native identity for professional clout for the better part of 3 decades. This type of behavior takes away from the legitimate hard work being put in by modern American indigenous leaders who are trying so hard to wind back the misrepresentation and damage that pretendians have wrought over the years. So I promise that there's not a rug pull here, but for a look at an actual, real indigenous person who is doing real good work, we could look no further than someone like Carrie Bourassa. She's a medical health researcher who rose to become the top voice on Indigenous health in Canada. She's the scientific director of the Canadian Institutes of Health Research's Institute of Indigenous Peoples' Health, a government-appointed position. And her book, Listening to the Beat of Our Drum, Indigenous Parenting in Contemporary Society, is filled with passionate details of her real childhood in an actual Indigenous community. She even gave a very inspiring TEDx talk. Huge to have an Indigenous person telling their story on such a big stage.
Greetings. My name's Morningstar Bear. Whew. I'm just going to say it, I'm emotional, so. I'm Bear Clan. I'm an Anishinaabe Métis from Treaty 4 territory, and I want to acknowledge the territory that I'm in, Treaty 6 territory, home to the Cree peoples and homeland of the Métis Nation.
Now, the only thing that I can criticize Morningstar Bear on, and it's a tiny thing, really inconsequential, is that I lied and she's 100% white. She is 100% white. What the fuck is going on? I don't understand what's happening anymore. How does this keep happening? I feel so bad for actual Indigenous people doing real hard work. I don't understand what's going on, man. Bourassa was immediately fired when this all came to light in 2021, but I look at this. I look at her electric blue shawl and feather in her braided hair and darkened skin, and I lose my fucking mind, man. She and her sister won thousands of dollars in scholarships intended for members of the Métis. And she had the top position in Indigenous science in the country, and it was all a scam. Now, this con artistry isn't a exclusively white phenomenon. It's just like many problems in the United States, a mostly white phenomenon. The very first all-music program in the global history of television was actually by American superstar Korla Pandit. Korla Pandit's adventures in music took America by storm in 1949, with Pandit's silent, hypnotic gaze and incredible talent winning him instant stardom. He never spoke throughout over 900 performances, perhaps because he didn't nail the accent yet. Pandit was actually John Roland Redd, a black American who masqueraded as a French Indian musician from New Delhi and maintained his identity in public and in private for the rest of his life. Even his sons didn't know their true background. He would only go to visit his birth family under very rare and clandestine circumstances, even then only dressing himself as this Korla Pandit character and never allowing his sons to visit. His secret wouldn't come out until years later. Now, hopefully when looking at these cases and looking at Dolezal, you're beginning to see the parallels. But again, it's important to stress that of all of these people, none of them identified as transracial. And in fact, nobody that we can see in the history of the planet ever identified themselves that way until Dolezal decided to 5 weeks after Caitlyn Jenner had came out as transgender in 2015. Curious. What was that? I don't know why I did that. That said, Dolezal is not the only person to smack on some blackface and start calling themselves transracial. And if you thought that these stories were crazy, then we are about to get into the goddamn tea.
Yes, and we're doing everything we possibly can to help and to aid the community.
So what do you have to say about the allegations of your ethnicity?
I believe that's a very...
Are you black?
Am I...
Are these your parents?
Yes, yeah.
So you're aware that they're black? One more question. Quarter brick, half a brick, whole brick. Hey! We got him!
Oh my god, I am so excited to talk about these people, y'all. I need to make it clear that at the jump, I am as voyeuristic as the average American. My sister and I love cracking open a bottle of wine and binging The Real Housewives and seeing what new crimes Jen Shaw got up to this week, or what new insane piece of backstory we're going to hear from Mary, who married her own grandfather. Oh, the show is so good. Now, our ultimate goal here is to give you some arguments against people who want to conflate so-called transracial people with transgender people, who want to denigrate transgender people by painting them as equivalently sick or dishonest. Those arguments do exist, but for the sake of structure, they're going to be in the next part as we bring it all together. If you want to hear those now, then feel free to skip ahead before we dive into the transracial iceberg, because it's going to get dark really quick. Pun unintended. For the rest of you, before we start reasoning this out, well, we gotta see what we're talking about, right? So let's take a look at all of the most notable people who are associated with the transracial label. This will be the deep dive to end all deep dives, so grab a drink and some snacks because this is a roller coaster that will not let up, y'all. I knew about most of these people going into this, but even I am just like, shocked by what I found. So for the most part, these post-Rachel Dolezal transracial people fall into one of two groups. I don't want to prejudice your understanding, and everybody should come to their own conclusions, which may or may not be the same as mine. That said, to me, the two groups are scared con artist and, to put it gently, the experience havers. Let's start with the experience havers. And where better to start it off with than with the man himself? Good old cocaine biceps, Captain Nuclear Forearms. That's right, baby. The king, Nuka Zeus.
What's up, y'all? Nuka Zeus here, representing that black power, you know what I'm saying? The injections that I inject into myself as an experimental drug supposedly makes your pigments working overtime to produce more melanin in the skin.
Nuka Zeus, aka Aaron Joseph Januszewski, is perhaps known for this legendary photo that he kept as his profile picture on social media. He's an internet personality whose claim to fame is his public transition from white to black done publicly, mostly through medically inadvisable doses of tanning injections. A horrified but fascinated public watched as Nuka Zeus did what he called a reverse Michael Jackson, getting darker and darker and battling some pretty dangerous side effects on his liver and skin. Nuka Zeus has a unique way of talking about race, as demonstrated by what he said regarding his parents.
Okay. And what nationality are your parents?
Technically, I consider them human. But I guess you could say other people would consider them Caucasian or some Italian, Sicilian.
But it's also clear that his Caucasian parents and siblings didn't always make him feel at home because he wasn't dark enough.
I've always felt a little different, and I always felt like I wanted to have darker skin. My whole family has darker skin than me, and my sister used to tease me and say I wasn't part of the family, say I was adopted because I was so light-skinned, and I just wanted to be like all my friends and stuff like that. So in middle school, I started thinking about doing plastic surgery to become, see if I can do the opposite of Michael Jackson.
He has a distaste for being called pale that extends to anything white, a sentiment which helped lead to his iconic forearm tattoos, which read, "Fuck whites" and "Black Power." Now, Nuka Zeus has occasionally claimed the transracial label, but he more often claims to be somewhere in the middle ground.
I feel like I'm like a mix between white and black. I feel like I'm just like in between somewhere. I'm not white, I'm not quite black, I'm just in the middle somewhere.
He doesn't align with Dolezal's claim of being born black, but rather points to a childhood revulsion of whiteness that pushed him to the literal dark side. And like all imaginary black people, he has the traditional Black Power phone case, which is actually kind of dope.
Yeah. Fuck whites. Black power. Yeah. Yeah, look at the Klansman hanging there.
He also has what he calls his Blackmobile, which has the lyrics from Changes by Tupac on the front and stickers saying "The black woman is my god" and "This is good hair" on it. And talk about being born in the wrong body, Mr. Zeus actually claims that he was born with a black dick.
I just want to let you know that I've always had a black dick. Like, bro, like, if you can see in some of my old videos and shit, like, I was, like, light skin, like, light skin. But for some odd reason, the one part of my body that never saw any sun, that hardly saw any sun at all, my dick and balls was the darkest part of my body by, like, 10 shades at least. It's very fucking weird, you know what I'm saying?
I found his real name because he was arrested for disorderly conduct in the past, but he's actually claimed that the real reason he was locked up was for trying to kill every white person on Earth. Which, like, yeah, it's a little disorderly.
I'm fucking done! When I was fucking 13 years old, I tried to kill every motherfucker in this goddamn town!
I'm filled with love.
I tried to kill every motherfucking white motherfucker!
I give out a whole aura of love.
Spend the whole fucking teenage years of my life locked up. I still, 20 years after the point, go through the shit. People see me, "Oh, you that dude that tried to kill every white motherfucker in school." Goddamn right I did. I'm tired of the way they treat us. Tired of the way they treat our people.
Jesus Christ, man. This is just like so not okay. Now, the more things have progressed with Mr. Zeus, the less entertaining things have become. His own accounting of his identity and psychology are shifting all the time and becoming less and less reliable. And his extreme chemical tanning injections have led to some really devastating health problems. In fact, just a few weeks ago, he had to go get a CAT scan due to signs of liver failure. Now, when I look at Nuka Zeus as an outsider, I could make some theories about how, as a child, he developed a disordered relationship with his own appearance and skin tone, which snowballed into what seems to be a pretty unique and painful identity disorder. But ultimately, I don't know Mr. Zeus. I don't know everything about him. And the more I looked into him, the more I started to get this weird feeling. This isn't a trashy reality show, or at least it isn't just a trashy reality show. This is someone's life. You can see this clear decline in mental state with Nuka Zeus, all documented piece by piece on social media, and the more I watched his health decline, the less I want to rag on the guy. Now, there is a lot that is very funny about Nuka Zeus. I mean, just check out those tattoos and the profile image. I mean, come on, it's incredibly offensive, but like Like it's also a little funny. Still, we're going to be seeing this a lot more as we move into the group of experience havers. And I'm just gonna move on to my favorite right now. That's right, baby. We're talking about the woman, the woe myth, the woe legend. That's right, baby. Martina Big. So Martina Big is a German actress, model, and all-around boss who, if you're familiar with plastic surgery shows like Botched, will likely be a familiar face to you. Why is she called Martina Big? Well, let's just take a look at her time on Botched.
Martina has the largest pair of breast implants in all of Europe. Those are huge.
Yo, Martina, yo, dude, yo.
That's a lot of boob, damn.
Martina Big got a very unique procedure done where she essentially got air valves placed underneath her arms so she could pump up her ridiculous slappies as much as she wants. And I mean, ultimately, hey, power to her. This, however, is about to take a huge turn. So on her website, martinabig.org, she neatly categorizes her career into 4 arcs. Those arcs being small, big, bigger, and black.
What the fuck is going on out here?
Oh, Jesus. Oh, Jesus, Martina. Oh my God. After beginning her process of getting tanning injections and getting covered on British and German TV, she went on a house hunting trip to Kenya where many people recognized her from TV. And y'all, here's the thing, and I really wish that this wasn't true, but by all accounts, the locals really liked her. She was baptized as Maleka Kubwa, which is Swahili for big angel. Like, holy shit, man. She felt very well loved in Kenya and described really feeling truly black when she went on a trip with the locals to dig up roots and make a fire. And like,
to learn more about the histories and the cultures. And there was several weeks I lived there with everyday life. And for example, the Maasai told me or taught me how to make fire without lighter. We go to the river and collected wood and carried.
And oh my God, the anchor's face, yo! Now, her husband butted in with a story about eager locals that normally I wouldn't include here, but 1, I need you to see the face that the anchor makes, and 2, the way that Martina's husband Michael talks is insane. And I feel like if I was given a mission to design the most cartoonish, stereotypical German man that I possibly could, and I showed up and presented Michael, they would say I had committed a hate crime. Please take a look.
When we go to get out the car in Kenya downtown, in Nairobi downtown, there came a lot of people. Oh, I know you from the British and US TV, and you are idol for me because you was white and you going black. The most white people said, oh, black is second class.
Ooh, baby, okay. All right, so reeling it in now that we've had our fun, is Martina truly transracial? Now, here's the thing. Some conservatives have brought her up as a transracial person, have used her to mock transgender people, but I really don't feel like she fits the bill. She has used the word transracial to describe herself in certain interviews, but she's absolutely not a native English speaker, and the way that she uses it is more just to describe how she changed her race rather than using it as a broader transgender identity corollary. Now, of course, the fake news anchors over at ITB want you to think that Martina was uncomfortable with how she looked or that she always felt black, but that's super not the case. And watch how Martina defends herself.
We have been following your story, and you were never comfortable with your natural appearance,
No,
the one you were born with.
I liked my natural blonde beauty, but also it's like tuning. If boys get a new car, they start tuning, and then they say, "Oh, it's a nice result. Let's find a matching piece," and then it's going to be more and more. And if you see the car they got and they have now,
so it's a work
totally
in progress.
Yeah.
So ultimately, is she transracial? She has said that she is, but after reading a lot about her and watching a dozen interviews with her, I really don't think so. At least not how Dolezal wants you to understand it. Big isn't a native English speaker, and she uses the term more to say, I became black, which has its problems, but it's like a different claim. I think ultimately we're probably seeing a case of somebody so into extreme body modification with a pretty high degree of body dysmorphia. Her motto, after all, is big is not big enough. But after pushing herself further and further in extreme surgery and aesthetic maximalism, it seems like she ran out of options and decided simply, well, what if I became black? Which is not great either. There's not a lot to say about Martina Big because honestly, of everybody on this list, she's the only person who, as far as I can tell, does not seem to be a pathological liar in any way. She's open about who she is, about how she was born, her biological details, her personal relationships and motives. She's never lied about her race or parents and is in general pretty honest, if occasionally inarticulate. This stands in stark contrast to our last contestant in the Experience Havers. That's right, it's musical legend and K-pop superstar, Oli London, baby!
It's cultural appreciation, not cultural appropriation. I'm not saying that I wanted to be Asian as such. I had my eyes done to make my eyes more almond shaped. And you put the Korean injection in me, I feel Korean. Wow. I'm the king of K-pop.
I'm the king of Korea.
Now I'm eating kimchi all on my own. Whoa.
So, Oli London is a 32-year-old internet personality who, after getting hooked on K-pop and spending a lot of time teaching English in Korea in 2013, embarked on a special journey to not just look more like his favorite K-pop star, Jimin from BTS, but to become Jimin through extreme elective plastic surgery. Now, as more and more people started paying attention to London, the surgery got more and more extreme, as did London's claims about their age, identity, history, and basically any material reality about their life.
My age, this is my sign, this is where I live.
This is your age. Here's where you live. Here's what you are.
Korean people love me.
Oli is actually currently the most prominent transracial person in pop culture, and many of the people that I talked to in researching this video hadn't heard of Rachel Dolezal, but they had heard of Oli London. A main reason for this is that Oli is an expert headline grabber. He's constantly pulling off ridiculous stunt after ridiculous stunt, like when he married a cardboard cutout of Jimin, which many found funny and outrageous, but when I see a stunt like this, I can't help but feel a little violated on behalf of the real Jimin. Oli usually punctuates their most outrageous headlines with music videos that read, to me, as racist Asian minstrel shows, like their music video announcing their divorce from cardboard Jimin, Korean boy, which goes a little something like this.
So can you tell me where my love has gone? He's my Korean boy. I woke up one morning and Jimin was gone. He's my Korean boy. Oh, I miss my Korean boy.
Now, at first he was happy to explain his plastic surgery obsession as being just particularly directed at Jimin, but as time went on, he then started claiming that he was not only non-binary, using he/they pronouns, and some more as we're going to get into in a second, but also transracial. This clearly was a claim intended to generate outrage and headlines, with Oli having a few choice tweets that were brought to my attention by the excellent YouTuber Frederick Chen.
My neo-pronouns, core/Ian plus J/Min. At this point, I can't tell if they're being a troll for attention or they actually feel that way, because they've made videos saying like, you're being rude, this is my identity, I'm really not appreciating the homophobic comments. But at the same time, how can you take that seriously?
Now, I too cannot tell with absolute certainty to what extent Oli is just trolling with all this, or with their official trans-Korean, trans-non-binary flag that London dropped for other people who may wish to identify as, quote, transracial, non-binary Koreans. Having your neopronouns be ko/Rian or G/Min seems clearly intended to troll, but when you look at the extent to which Oli has gone to absolutely reorganize their face and life and perception of reality, like, a little part of you wonders. Now, London, for my money, seems to be a prime example of Schrodinger's douchebag, a person who says absolutely outrageous things and then decides whether or not they were kidding based on the reactions of other people. In London's case, if people are upset, then London claims that they're having a legitimate experience. And if people just don't care, well then, oh well, tee-hee, on to the next headline that does get people pissed. Now, obviously, when most people see Oli's steady transformation into Jimin, they're less likely to imagine that he's having some race-based identity experience than they are likely to be reminded of the SpongeBob episode where Patrick slowly starts turning into SpongeBob. This is accentuated by the fact that for a transracial person who claims to love Korean culture, Oli sure does seem to be completely unable to put together a coherent Korean sentence.
원호 오빠, you are 멋있어요. 맛있어요.
진짜 오빠? 오빠 사랑해요.
반가워요.
반갑습니다.
이름이 뭐예요?
네?
이름이 뭐예요? 이름이 뭐예요?
And well, yeah, that's not great. Still, people often pause before writing Oli off as a truly evil grifter because when you look at him, it's kind of hard to imagine how anyone could take it this far just for a bit. And it seems like, as with many people who share London's, shall we say, personality type, Oli often seems genuinely deluded by their own lies. Now, I think that Dr. Phil is a galactic dickhead, but I do feel a dark sense of schadenfreude watching him go off on Oli when Oli claimed to be mistaken for Jimin in Korea by Koreans.
I'm happy. Like, if you look at the pictures of me and Jimin, we're identical.
No, you're not.
When I was in Korea, everyone calls me Jimin. When I'm walking down the street, everyone's like, oh my God, it's Jimin, it's Jimin. Like, everyone.
You are lying to me right now. Maybe you're lying to yourself. Either tell me the truth or shut up.
And Dr. Phil is clearly saying something that most of us are thinking, which is that even after dozens of procedures, Oli does not look like Jimin. I don't like making fun of people's appearances, but more than anything, it looks like Oli got 18 surgeries with the sole goal of turning into the cart titan. Now, Oli is still landing headline after headline, recently announcing that, and I'm so sorry to share this with you, but I had to read this stuff over and over again, so now you have to learn about it. Oli is booking a penis reduction surgery to, quote, bring himself to the Korean national average so he can finally be 100% Korean. And like, this is the most insanely racist thing ever. The idea that you're willing to cut half your dick off to say that you're a real Korean, but you won't learn how to say a single sentence of the fucking language? Like, Jesus Christ, what is wrong with you, dude? Also, he misidentifies the Korean national average as 3.5 inches when it's over 5 inches, and it's not like any of that even matters, but like, but what does matter is that Oli said that people are working hard to mock the, quote, transracial movement that he and Rachel Dolezal have been working so hard to raise awareness for, and that, quote, you wouldn't mock a transgender person for changing their body, so why mock me? All right, now here's the thing. I'm actually not in the business of trying to debunk Oli's identity, and to what degree they are able or willing to accurately assess and relay their own experiences is unknown to me. Oli seems to fit the criteria of a person with a very intense histrionic personality disorder, and although the claim of being transracial is brand new, people going to extreme medical and performative lengths for clout certainly is not. Now, I'm not saying that Oli is 100% faking it, but it's because of Oli that I chose to call this section the experience havers. Because while some people are clearly lying and covering themselves by saying, oh, well, I'm transracial, others are clearly, well, having an experience of some sort. But the thing is, and this should be revealing, do you know who Oli's biggest follower on Twitter is? If you guessed correctly, I will give you my firstborn, because whatever you're thinking, wrong. It's Ben Shapiro. And Ben retweets Oli all the time. in a manner that Oli seems to view as supportive, but which is clearly mocking Oli's experience and jubilantly conflating Oli's catastrophic identity struggle with all transgender people. Again, the whole transracial claim is something that was started by Rachel Dolezal to escape criticism for being caught. And this is getting into our second category of transracial people, the scared con artists. So, before we take down Blackface Bowser herself, we are going to do a boss rush of 3 of the greatest con artists of the last 5 years. One of whom I am betting that you haven't heard from before, but for my money, has a story twice as crazy as Rachel's. So, first off, Treasure Richards. Why am I not showing a photo of Treasure Richards? Well, Treasured Richards, or as she calls herself on YouTube, Treasure the White Queen, first made headlines in 2018 when she appeared on the Dr. Phil show, where she came out as a transracial white supremacist. Now, Treasure herself is very black, not white, and her whole grift was essentially doing a gender-swapped Uncle Ruckus deal, except some of the shit that came out of Treasure's mouth was so outrageous that, like, even Uncle Ruckus might be like, yo, Treasure, give black people a break. Come on, man. Like, it's really bad. Now, it made for big headlines, and you can dive into this deeper on your own time, but I'm not going to. The reason? Well, Treasure was 16 when all of this happened. She hasn't posted on YouTube for over a year. And when I see Dr. Phil dragging this kid who is clearly trolling and clearly in pain out on national television so that he could yell at her for an hour, it just encapsulates everything bad about Dr. Phil and the rest of the media. To be frank, I am not interested in contributing to the mobbing of a black child. And I think that giving her the platform that Dr. Phil did more damage than anything that came out of Treasure's mouth. Now, Treasure is an adult now, but her biography consists of a complicated relationship with an extremely mentally ill mother who brought her on Dr. Phil, an excellent father who died when they were young, and a complicated relationship with a white stepfather. You could look up the interview Treasure's sister did with Unwind with Tasha K for the relevant details. It's basically confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt that Treasure was trolling at this point, and she's gone dark on social media. I come from an extremely fucked up family background myself, and I look at this and I think about what I would do if my parent dragged me out on TV at my lowest point as a child just to have a bald, sweat-covered, white fake doctor verbally abuse me on national TV because of my desperate cry for attention. And like, I just absolutely sad stuff. It was absolutely a con, and here's hoping that Treasure can find rest and find a future space to heal and grow away from the trauma. Okay, now next up, and this is the moment that I have been waiting for. This is the craziest story in the entire video, for my money. My personal favorite, Jessica Krug. This shit is peak insanity. So, Jessica Krug. Growing up in the nearly completely white community of Overland Park, Kansas, Krug was known at her local well-to-do high school as a epic shit stirrer. At one point, interrupting a giant school assembly in 1999 to scream at the top of her lungs, "There's going to be a giant gay prom this weekend, and you're all invited." Nobody had any idea what she was talking about. But that wasn't the only awesome thing that Krug did at school. She forced her way onto the boys' baseball team to protest there not being a girls' team, despite having never played baseball herself before. She planned an at-school flag burning, and she handed in so many sexually inappropriate writings to the school literary paper that her teachers had to beg her to tone it down. Honestly, she sounded awesome. Unfortunately, she was also caught plagiarizing, and in the embarrassment reoriented herself to graduate early, which she did. She left for college at 17, and everybody at school and most of her family never heard from her ever again. Absolute G shit. But this technique of cutting everybody off in her life was a habit she was about to repeat again and again for a very bad reason. She went to the University of Kansas still identifying as white, but then she moved with her boyfriend out west to Portland State, and as most people who moved to Portland can attest, that was when life started getting really fucked up. Krug launched her transformation in Portland, starting to darken her skin with more tanning products and starting to slip into conversations that she was black. When she went to Washington to get her master's and PhD, she had started fully living the lie. So the common theme that you're gonna notice as we move on with Krug's story is her absolutely ginormous set of fucking balls. Because the audacity with which she would straight-facedly lie to non-white people and the degree of her lies was like on a truly planetary level. I highly recommend the Atlantic article The Identity Hoaxers by Helen Lewis, where she writes on Krug and others. But for this video, we're gonna mostly be using clips from The True Story of Jessica Krug by Marina Kashino as published in The Washingtonian, which is frankly the greatest article of all time. We're gonna be helped out by one of my favorite people in the world, Casterline, who, as you will soon see, is not a huge fan of Krug's either. Yeah, whenever you're ready. You're gonna kill it, Cass! You're fucking amazing at this! You're born for this! You were a born fucking artist, bro.
I was born a fucking brown woman.
Dude, if you went like this to your face and like brushed off makeup and there was white underneath, I would kill myself right now. I would lose my mind. Like if you were like, James, you're not going to expose us.
James,
and I heard a knock on my door.
Like, yeah. And it's like all these fucking like white women in dreads come in and they are like fucking like.
Holy shit, you could smell the mold. Like. Holy fuck.
Fucked up.
God. Let's start with her transformation, as relayed to Kashino by an ex-friend of Krug's.
She started to identify herself with the us and we pronouns, says Julia, who is Afro-Latina. She had assumed that Krug, with her pale skin and nearly buzzed off blonde hair, was white. But as Krug kept talking, says Julia, I soon came to realize that she was identifying herself as black.
That went on for a long time, and she just slowly gaslit all of her black friends into just, like, assuming she was exceptionally light-skinned.
And that's even, like, taking advantage of the fact that, like, in, like, POC culture, we have such a variety of colors across the board. Like, what an abuse of that fact. You know, when in a POC household, like, colorism still exists, and that's such a, like, tender topic, and, like, how fucking dare you? How fucking dare you, like, claim that and then diminish authentic black people's blackness?
Krug must have played with loaded dice because her whole story is just roll deception, nat 20, nat 20, nat 20, nat 20. It's just like crazy shit.
The minute we would try to deepen our friendship, Julia says, she would say or do something very off-putting about my own class position or my own blackness. For example, at that time, Krug was telling people she came from the ghetto of Kansas City, went to mostly black schools, and had been conceived when her black mom, an abusive drug addict, was raped by her white dad. Oh my fucking God. She lorded this tough upbringing over her friends, Julia says, as evidence that she was authentically black, while calling Julia, who grew up in middle class, bougie. Get the fuck out of here.
What the fuck?
The goddamn motherfucking nerve.
Bro, that is bold. What the fuck? You're gonna call her bougie and question her blackness, dude? Like, what the fuck, man? What is going on here? She also manufactured this claim that she was in a long-distance marriage to a Nigerian man, which was crumbling because he was cheating on her with a white woman. Like, Jesus Christ, man. Krug played this transracial grift on Dark Souls mode, dude. Like, what's going on? Friends felt alienated because she would only use them to process a ton of emotional labor, only calling them to cry about her fake marriage, or only talking in person with them about her traumatic past. Now, the thing is, Krug didn't just do this with the black people around her. She started going around collecting identities like Thanos filling up the Infinity Gauntlet. It's like,
now, my race can be whatever I want.
Julia, Krug's black friend from earlier, was one of a group of people who started catching on to the lie that must have been going on here, but Krug quickly cut her and everybody else in her life off and then moved on to the next town. Krug then started pursuing her PhD, and things get extra strange here because as she started mingling with some of the top scholars in African history in New York, she established herself as a rising star in the field, with her book Fugitive Modernities actually winning a lot of praise. Now, at this point, Krug was not just claiming to be like a mixed American, but was claiming to be a light-skinned North African. And there were minor hiccups, like when at a dinner party with other scholars, Krug started talking about how she came from the Tuareg people of North Africa, and things did not go well.
Brighton was surprised when Krug, with her sandy-hued buzz cut, identified herself as black. Her explanations of her background were inconsistent too. Once, over a meal with Brighton and Brighton's then husband, Krug said she came from the Tuareg people, a semi-nomadic group in North Africa. My ex-husband, though, he lived and studied on the continent for a few years, so he was very familiar with the Tuareg, and he had questions, says Brighton. Krug struggled to supply answers. She never brought up the Tuareg to Brighton again. Holy fuck! Yes! That's the fucking fact.
The nuts! The nuts when you're at a dinner with African scholars to be like, yes, I come from the plains of North Africa. And the experts are just like, oh, really? I love the plains. Where from? And you're like,
To even come up with something like the Tuareg people, like, wow, bitch, you did your fucking research. And like a very grazed over research, but you did your fucking research. And you were like, oh, I'm going to claim this.
Yeah.
Like, what? Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, that is
so true.
That's like a different kind of evil. That's a different kind of evil, a well thought out kind of evil.
Yeah.
It's sociopathic almost. Yeah. It's so sociopathic almost. Like, in the way that sociopaths are so good at covering up their tracks sometimes. Right? And that they are like insane pathological liars. A woman like this, I have no doubts in my mind that she is capable of violent evils.
Dude, like, imagine running a con like this and being in a group that is like the most likely to find you out in the world. This is like playing with fire on another level. So Krug would go on playing the role of a extremely confrontational, militant, anti-white, anti-capitalist, anti-police activist, which, while based, she performed in such an inflammatory manner that it made even the actual black radical scholars around her be like, yo, Jessica, calm down, dude. This is making us look crazy, dude. But whenever somebody spoke up, Krug would go in on them for not being authentically black or for being self-hating, which is crazy because, again, Jessica is a white woman. She would be like, not only am I black, but you're not, you know, just like wild. It reminds me of that one comic that was going around after the last election, after Joe Biden was saying that if you were having trouble deciding whether to vote for him or Trump, then, quote, you ain't black, with the one woman screaming,
I'll never vote for you!
Then I'm afraid you ain't black. It's like Krug was a lich that could only sustain herself on the melanin of others. Her friends were exhausted by her. And the reason I mentioned that comic is because around 2010, she moved to the Bronx with a new Puerto Rican boyfriend. And then suddenly, she started talking about her non-existent Puerto Rican grandmother, which nobody had ever heard of before. Her friends were confused.
The friend who consoled Krug through her relationship troubles remembers when Krug introduced this new backstory too, abruptly announcing one day that Krug wasn't actually her family's name. She passed it off as her grandmother, who was supposedly suffering from some form of Alzheimer's or dementia, had a very lucid moment in which she said, oh, you know, our last name is Cruz. In reality, as the friend explains, the only thing Puerto Rican about her was her boyfriend.
When everything came crashing down, the boyfriend was devastated, saying,
"When I found out, it was a gut punch to my stomach. I don't know what I can add. She made me feel like a damn fool. She stole my Afro-Latino identity. For what? Tenure? Bro, this is get out! Oh my God. This literally is."
So then Krug started teaching at George Washington University, but was rarely ever on campus except for her lectures. She invented a fake Puerto Rican brother who went to prison and told the other faculty that she had to care for his children in the Bronx. So she commuted every day to class and then right back home. To quote the Washingtonian,
"She was rarely on campus, holding office hours via Skype, and when she did make it to faculty meetings, she was combative and dogmatic, to the point of offending some colleagues. If anyone broached the idea of hiring another expert on the African diaspora, she would pounce. Jess would assert that she already did that," says Chapman. "I joked with the others that she thinks she knows the history of anybody who is black in the world at any time, in any place, in any language." Yeah, because that's how she's fucking acting. She's acting like she's like, you know how like black people will always say, "I don't want to be the voice for every fucking black person." And this bitch wants to be the fucking voice for every fucking black person. That should have been another red flag.
Krug, meanwhile, was tearing her way through New York City, transforming from Krug to Cruz into a new identity this time. Her new pseudonym was Jess La Bombalera, the fiery Afro-Latina activist. You have been so patient, and I know you've been wondering, so yes, it's finally time to hear Jessica Krug speak during a New York City council hearing.
Hey, I'm Jess La Bombalera. I'm here in El Barrio, East Harlem. You probably know this neighborhood because the Hosanna Melissa Mark Vivarito, who used to be the speaker of your city council, sold my fucking neighborhood to developers and gentrifiers. So I got a couple of things to say. And when y'all come on and tell me my time stops, fuck out of here.
Truly amazing, truly excellent performance by Jess La Bombalera. Also, I do need to point out to my non-Spanish speaking audience that bombalera is not a word, not in Spanish or any other language. So considering what she sounded like, how did she get away with this for so long? Well, a big part is how she would blow up at friends and colleagues at the slightest pushback, or how she would cut you off if she sensed any suspicion from you. When Krug's mother died, she went to the same friend that she had turned into her personal therapist when she found out her Nigerian husband was cheating on her with a white woman. The woman expressed shock because Krug had basically previously painted her mother as a abusive, insane crackhead who she hated beyond belief. Now, however, Krug was painting her as this perfect mother dearest figure who she loved and treasured beyond belief. The friend was understandably confused at the sudden change. Despite supporting Krug, Krug sensed her apprehension, accused her of being not supportive enough, and then cut her out of her life completely without warning. So, how did this all finally come crashing down? Well, do you remember Julia, the friend from earlier who had caught on to the fact that Krug was probably lying? Julia got embroiled in an online discussion regarding recently deceased, celebrated Cuban author Herman Carrillo, who had just passed away, except his name was not Herman Carrillo, it was Herman Carroll. And he wasn't a Cuban exile, he was an African-American man from Detroit. The kicker is that for years, he had also taught at George Washington University. Which, I mean, isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. This wild story inspired Julia to speak up. So she reached out to her fellow academic, Dr. Yomaira Figueroa Vasquez, for help. And Figueroa Vasquez was pissed off, dude. She was actually a black Puerto Rican woman from the hood, and so when she saw Krug making a mockery of her heritage, her skin, of academia, of everything, she was ready, man. She dug up Krug's parents' obituaries online, saw that they were both very white Jewish people from Missouri, and she knew the jig was up. Figueroa Vasquez and Julia didn't plan on taking it to the media or straight to GWU. They just wanted Krug to apologize and stop doing this shit. Before they approached Krug, though, they reached out to people who knew Krug to gauge their reactions and see if they had more evidence, and Krug must have been tipped off. Instead of going quietly into that good night, Krug chose to go out with a bang. And 8 days after Julia reached out to Dr. Figueroa Vasquez, Krug decided to take herself out like the Joker at the end of The Dark Knight, except there was no net waiting for her. She pressed publish on the Medium article that would end her career and every personal friendship she had. It was titled The Truth and the Anti-Black Violence of My Lies.
In it, she says, for the better part of my adult life, every move I've made, every relationship I've formed has been rooted in the napalm toxic soil of lies. To an escalating degree over my adult life, I have eschewed my lived experience as a white Jewish child in suburban Kansas City under various assumed identities within a blackness that I had no right to claim. First, North African blackness, then US-rooted blackness, then Caribbean-rooted Bronx blackness. I have not only claimed these identities as my own when I had absolutely no right to do so, when doing so is the very epitome of violence, of thievery, of appropriation, of the myriad of ways in which non-Black people continue to use and abuse Black identities and cultures. But I have formed intimate relationships with loving, compassionate people who have trusted and cared for me when I have deserved neither trust nor caring. Just shut up! Fuck you!
Right.
Talk about a fucking victim complex. Right. I don't think that there is a right way to apologize for this. And any apology that's ever given for something like this, it will never be enough. It will never, ever be enough because of the weight that it means to take away from the truth of marginalized communities in such a grandiose way.
Yeah.
And yeah, the cherry on top of the intimate relationships and the trust that she's formed with people, it just shows how manipulative she is, because that trust wasn't, oh, we trust you for being Black. It's, well, this bitch is really digging her whole fucking story out and fucking doing that. I guess maybe I'm not in a place to argue. It's manipulative. Were these relationships intimate and caring and trustworthy, and were they full of compassion? Because I think that you gaslighted the fuck out of people into giving you love and compassion.
Oddly enough, not a single time in the entire gigantic Medium article did she apologize or just say, I'm sorry. Instead, it's this gigantic, self-indulgent, slam poetry style hate crime confession of just I adopted some blackness, that was some whackness, tons of racism I practiced, and I'm bro, can you please stop? This happened in 2020, after the statement Krug resigned from George Washington University a few days later, and she was never heard from publicly again. Students were devastated, especially students of color who relied on Krug and trusted her in part because of her alleged lived experience and paid to learn under her.
So to know that all of that was a lie and she was telling people to embrace their identity.
And it was truly, deeply some evil, violating shit. Krug had built her whole career on being a race that she was not, accepted multiple scholarships meant for people of color, and betrayed every one of her students, friends, and colleagues. She was a con artist, and many claim that she was transracial, but even though Wikipedia might link to her as a transracial person, which is why I had to put her here on the list, that is absolutely not a claim that she has ever made herself. She was a con artist and admits that she understands that she was scamming people, and in the end, owned up to being caught. She didn't claim being transracial, didn't claim that she always felt this way. None of it. She's clearly an asshole, but if Rachel Dolezal did the same thing rather than inventing this whole transracial category in the wake of Caitlyn Jenner, the identity likely would not exist today. Well, honestly, it actually seems like something that Oli London might have come up with anyway for attention, but the transgender rights movement would have had a massive head start in countering this type of bullshit conflation by the time the cart titan got around to it. So who are we left with truth when we look at who is actually claiming to be transracial. Well, Krug owned up to the con, Treasure the White Queen has essentially been found out, and Martina Big isn't using it as an inherent identity marker. So ultimately, we're looking at Oli London, Rachel Dolezal, and Nuka Zeus, the monster trio of minstrelsy. Really not the people I would elect as figureheads for my burgeoning social movement. The transracial are not sending their best. They're Korslashian, they're Dominican, they're very... I don't know why I'm doing this. So Oli and Nuka Zeus clearly seem to have some stuff going on, which leads us to our final boss, Rachel Dolezal, who seems comparatively really articulate. She's well educated, she knows how to adopt the language of the marginalized, and she really thought through the details before digging into the transracial identity and making her media tour. Now here's the thing, we talked through some of the details surrounding her life before, but what I didn't tell you is the hidden truth of Rachel Dolezal, her secret history that nobody really seems to talk about. And I guarantee that it'll help us crack the code on our situation. So Dolezal is, in all senses, and this will be shocking to you, a pathological liar. More than that, however, she is deeply troubled. She has said that she was born to a black father, that she was raised in a teepee in South Africa.
She did not grow up in a teepee. It's become a pattern. It's become a habit for her.
That she learned to hunt for food with a bow and arrow, and would, on family game night, play chess using lima beans instead of chess pieces. All of which was obviously a lie. She claims to have colored herself using dark brown crayons as a child, which, after many interviews with her family showing evidence of her early childhood drawings, this seems untrue. She claimed African ancestry on an application to work for the police in Spokane. Yikes. She said that a black man named Albert Wilkinson was her real father and escaped 3 repeated assassinations by his white co-workers during his time in the military, which, to be clear, I would not put past the military. She claimed that when her father ran for city commissioner when she was younger, that the N-word was painted on many of his advertising signs, and she had to work with her family scrubbing them off. Her dad is white, so that'd be weird. Those 9 alleged hate crimes, including the unmarked letter, well, she told police that it was because of her biracial heritage, a heritage which obviously she does not have. She seems to exhibit the traits of a person with a complicated personality disorder. It might be delusional psychosis, she could be a pathological liar, a little of column A, a little of column B. But here's the thing, I'm not a psychiatrist. When I say could be, this could be the mind, this could be the diagnosis exhibiting the traits of, it's like, this is like JCS psychology, you know what I mean? Like, this is not real. This is just some asshole on the internet making a best guess. I am not a psychiatrist. Rachel is not my patient, and I don't know for sure what's going on here. Either way, we should not trust her when she claims to be a representative of a huge population of hidden transracial people that knew that they were black ever since they were kids. Here is the rarely discussed truth about Rachel as I was able to uncover it. I looked at the US Census data for Lincoln County, Montana, where Rachel was born, and it has a near 0% black population at the time of her birth. But what she did have, from what we can tell, was a really fucked up upbringing. She has 1 biological sibling, and then here is the kicker that will help you unlock this whole thing. So I want you to pay attention carefully because this is going to be shocking. So Rachel has 1 biological sibling, 3 adopted African American siblings, and 1 adopted Haitian sibling. Her older biological brother, Joshua Dolezal, is a respected poet, professor, and author who wrote a book called Down from the Mountaintop, From Belief to Belonging, which describes an incredibly fucked up childhood under their cult-like Christian parents who weaponized the Bible like a bat wrapped in barbed wire. I read the book for this video and like, man, it's a doozy. Now, Rachel would actually go on to gain sole custody and legal guardianship of her adopted brother, Isaiah Dolezal, who was allegedly, and please, before everything I'm about to say about this, put that word allegedly, beaten horribly along with his siblings, and was met with threats of being sent off to a group home at the sign of any disobedience. After gaining custody of Isaiah, Rachel would constantly refer to him, her brother, as her son, and implied that he was her biological son in post after post after post. Now, Rachel was, in some measures, also quite smart. She probably wouldn't have gotten this far if she wasn't. She was a co-valedictorian of her high school with a 4.0 average and won multiple art scholarships. She went to Howard University, which is a super historically black university here in the US, and graduated with an MFA summa cum laude in 2002, after submitting some thesis paintings from the point of view of a black man. And listen, I'm not an art historian, but after looking at a couple of these paintings, a few things jump out to me. For instance, her painting, The Ship of Our Kind. Is it just me, or does it look pretty close to J.M.W. Turner's The Slave Ship? And her painting Pariah. Now, I know this one is a stretch. It seems just a little similar to this frame from the groundbreaking queer black film Pariah. The name's a little similar too there. Speaking of Pariah, there's this other frame from the movie which looks a little bit like Dolezal's painting A Like World. And then there's also this article that Rachel Dolezal wrote which claims to recall Peggy McIntosh's White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. But does recall really mean lift multiple complete sentences from without attribution or quotation and then putting it under your own name? Huh. Fascinating. I'm learning new things every day. Dolezal also went on to sue Howard University in 2002 for racial discrimination against her for being white, claiming that the administration showed preferential treatment for the work of African American students over Dolezal and her work, imagining what the African American experience might be like. I understand why ContraPoints drinks in her videos now, man. She also claims to have been sexually assaulted by a trusted mentor at Howard, which may have happened. She also claimed to have been sexually assaulted when she was younger by her brother Joshua Dolezal, which, looking at the evidence and context, seems like it maybe didn't happen. Maybe it did. I don't know. She then later went on to marry a black man who she later accused of physical and sexual abuse. Got divorced from him and would go on to, as far as I can tell from social media, only date black men in the future.
There's a lot to unpack here.
So, the truth about Rachel? She's just really fucked up. She's really fucked up. She's fucked up from childhood and fucked up from her parents, and she's just totally fucked up. Her view on race? Fucked up. Her view on herself? Fucked up. She has lived a crazy, dishonest, evil, abuse-ignited disaster life. And hey, turns out that every year when we hear about a new person claiming to be transracial to justify getting caught doing blackface, it turns out to be a not too dissimilar situation. So all of these stories have been fascinating and painful and damaging and mind-melting and outrageous and all those things. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, disoriented, or upset, grab a glass of water and deep cleansing breath, Hakuna Matata. You made it. The nightmare is over. We got through it. And here we are left with our fine specimens of transracialism.
Heyo, fighting. Oppa, fighting. Yay, 사랑해. 귀엽.
Are you African American?
I don't understand the question.
And what a long, strange journey it's been. So finally, now that we're through, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's spell out what exactly is wrong here.
Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this picture?
I don't understand what's happening.
How do we explain this behavior?
Parents were asked this question this week and they didn't have any trouble answering it. Here's what they said. She's clearly our birth daughter and we're clearly Caucasian. That's just a fact. Your father went on to say she's a very talented woman doing work she believes in. Why can't she do that as a Caucasian woman, which is what she is? How do you answer that question?
Ooh, okay. Hydrate or dihydrate, baby. Come on. Home stretch, here we go. So first off, thank you so much for watching this far. And before we get all philosophical about this, if you've enjoyed the journey so far and feel like I've earned it, doing the whole like, comment, subscribe thing would be super amazing. I'm setting a goal to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and if you could help me out with that, I would be incredibly grateful. So we've just wrapped up our overview of those making the transracial claim, and I'm really curious what you think when you look at people like Nuka Zeus, Oli London, Rachel Dolezal, the three who are the most staunch and consistent about claiming transracial is a identity marker, I think you can suss out that I do not hold these people in the highest regard. It upsets me to think about the damage that they've done to trans discourse, the harm done to their communities and families. It feels to me to be racist and nauseating, and frankly, I don't care much for it, but I'm curious what you think. That said, there is a part of me that when looking at the experiences that these folks claim to have, the medical problems, the surgeries, the conflict with identity and self, that makes me a little empathetic to the ways that they might be suffering. There's this strange secret alchemy to the way that people process pain or trauma, and I'm always split in circumstances like this. How is it that some people take these struggles and can grow and heal, whereas some take that pain they feel and they direct it inward, and others take that pain and direct it outward and hurt those around them? It's a lot to think about. Do I blame them for the way that they're handling it, or do I blame the media for the way in which they've amplified these people and given their voice the attention that it clearly never would have gotten otherwise? In some cases like Oli London and Nuka Zeus, the attention is clearly hurting them as well, with Oli psychologically compelled to be even more and more outrageous and beat his last stunt in a way that is so extreme and clearly pathological, I have a hard time blaming them completely. For instance, Oli would likely not, in this moment, be talking about cutting their dick in half to become Korean if it wasn't for the 40th headline they felt compelled to chase on the Daily Mail. You know what I mean? Nuka Zeus's injections and dysmorphia have clearly been getting more and more extreme, in part because of the inflammatory and toxic community that has formed around him, constantly taunting him and goading him on social media, and it's sad to see him struggle. Obviously, blame is to be shared here, even among me, the consumer, the viewer, watching whenever Oli drops a new music video, taking part in the spectacle, the public immolation, watching these lives with the sick curiosity of someone slowing down while passing a car crash. Now, Dolezal, having started all this, seems to me to be much more intentional and deliberate in her actions, seems more in possession of her faculties, which makes her seem more villainous to me. Dolezal also started teaching Africana education at Eastern Washington University, and there is this strange pattern of white women in higher academia seeming more likely to adopt these false racial identities, and it's very odd, and I'm not really sure what to make of it. It's almost like when climbing the ladder of academia, some see entrenched old white men on one side benefiting from their entrenched privilege, and then on the other side they see non-white professors on the come up finally gaining some more acknowledgement after centuries of underrepresentation, and start licking their lips and looking at their colleagues of color like Bilbo Baggins looked at Frodo when he had the ring, going after all, why shouldn't it be me? Why shouldn't I be Puerto Rican? It's very weird. But I feel like I can't simply write Dolezal off as blackface Cruella de Vil, even though that is a part of who she is. Same with London or Nuka Zeus, because doing so would be missing the entire point here. They are clearly going through some type of identity struggle or experience, but they've also done irreparable harm to people, and both of those facts have to coexist in our minds as we talk about this. Luckily, and here's the twist, this isn't about whether or not Dolezal's identity is heckin' valid ooh-woo or not, or whether Oli London is truly going through what he claims to be. Because as Dr. Jordan Peterson would say, well, that depends on what you mean by valid. What does truth mean here, bucko? It's not, is Dolezal valid or is this real? Because again, just like the bad faith copy ninja can play back your arguments mockingly for transracialism, he could do so for identifying as an attack helicopter as well, and that doesn't make either identity less unintelligible and fantastical. The question is not, is your identity valid? Because what does that even mean? The question is, what good reasons do we have to treat your identity seriously? Do we have good reasons to think that you're accurately articulating your experience? And is seeking to more deeply understand and support your experience likely to be a good use of our time? These are the important questions, and it's these points that people generally fail to consider when talking about the transracial arguments. They skip ahead to entering the philosophical, spiritual identity thunderdome without answering the basics. Now, to help answer these questions, I have created 5 important points that are key to understanding whether or not engaging with a alleged experience or identity is worthwhile, or if it's a toxic claim meant to harm you. And coincidentally, we're gonna call it the Harm You Test, an acronym that I definitely didn't spend half an hour rephrasing the constituent words of and finding synonyms again and again while plugging them into the Scrabble word finder so I could create a snippy little acronym. Yes, I am trying to make fetch happen. What are you gonna do about it?
I'm a genius.
Yeah, I know you are.
So, what are these cool 5 points that you're talking about? So, harm you. History, amount, reliability, monetary motive, and universality. You see, guys, it's not that bad. It's not that bad, okay? It's a natural and cool, unforced acronym, and people will love it, and it's gonna go down in history as one of the most widely beloved, greatest acronyms of all time, man. This is what researching transracial people for 200 hours does to your brain, man. Yo, I'm so dumb. So let's look at the claims of transgender people and the claims of transracial people and see if they pass the Harm You test. History. Does the historic record show us that people have been having similar experiences throughout the past across the globe? Because here's the thing, it actually is okay to defer to historical examples here. Most conservatives today argue that transness and homosexuality are new things brought about by the decadent, butt-fucking global left. And the thing about that is they're wrong. The weight of history and historical example does give us reason to be quite sympathetic to trans lives and quite unsympathetic to supposedly transracial people like Rachel Dolezal. Ask any historian, anthropologist, or sociologist, and they will tell you that we have many, many, many examples of transgender identities being core to cultures in every single continent for all of recorded history. In the Americas, they were lumped together as berdache, now recognized to basically be a slur, and are now captured under the Two-Spirit umbrella, which similarly oversimplifies hundreds of different tribal categories and gender systems across North and South Africa, each with their own traditions, practices, and beliefs. There are the Kinar of India, the Gali of Greece, and the Roman Emperor/Empress Elgabalus. There's the Bernesha of the Balkans. There's the Kok Church of the Siberian Italmens, the Ray Ray of Tahiti, the Fafafine in Samoa, the Vakaselualua of Fiji, and the Igbo and Mabuti tribes of Africa that assign gender at 5 or 13 years old, respectively, depending on the energy of the child. And please trust me when I say that is just the tip of the iceberg. Nearly every nation on Earth has their own corresponding pre-colonial gender deviations and norms that can be understood on their own merit, and in general, absolutely fucking rock to learn about, tons of which definitely fall under the umbrella of our current understanding of transgender identities. The amount of transracial identified people that we can tell existed throughout the globe before 2015? 0. The number of transracial identified people that existed since Rachel Dolezal was exposed as a fraud in 2015, 5 weeks after every major station and newspaper in America started blasting the story of Caitlyn Jenner across the country? Like a couple. Boom, history. Transgender 1, transracial 0. Hey, and speaking of like a couple, A, amount. Are there many people who identify this way? This really matters. By even conservative estimates, there are over 1.4 million transgender people in the United States alone, and millions and millions and millions more throughout the world. Transracial people? I don't know, 6, 7? A literal 1 in a billion claim? This is an important thing to think about when we make a value judgment about whether or not it is worth our time to seek to understand and normalize an experience personally or societally. For transgender people, it is widespread enough that it likely affects your day-to-day. You likely have a transgender friend, or if you're hot, mostly transgender friends. But you're also likely to have family, friends, coworkers, or neighbors that may be trans. That means that for most of us, it is worth taking seriously. It's worth understanding their experience and worth empathizing with them. And hey, since there are so many of them, Maybe learning more about them can help teach us a little more about what it is to be human. If there were as many transgender people as there were Dragon Balls, we would not be having this discussion. If somebody were to tell me that they did research across the globe and found out that there were 40 people in the world saying that they actually really did identify as attack helicopters, I'd say, it's not a lot, but it's weird that it happened 40 times. I would not spend a second engaging with the claim that we should treat them with the same seriousness and attention that we would millions and millions of trans people out there. Boom. A. Amount. Transgender 2, transracial 0. R. Reliability. Is your identity propped up with tons of lies about your history and material reality? Now, when you look at the history of people claiming a transracial identity, it has, shockingly, always come at the tail end of a long string of provable lies. My parents are black, I was born in Africa, Korean people mistake me for Jimin, I grew up in a teepee, I have a Puerto Rican grandmother, my ex-husband's a Nigerian guy and she's cheating on me with a white woman, I'm Cambodian. Etc., etc. When we see that somebody has a history of pathological lying, when it comes to events that happen to them, relationships they have, and the facts of their material reality and their background, it's actually a great reason to not lend that much credence to their claim. Transgender people, on the other hand, are, and I cannot stress this enough, not telling lies about their history and material reality. A trans man will generally not tell you that he was born with the penis and a Y chromosome to two cis male fathers who docked with each other to conceive them. He will usually not say that he used to date Queen Elizabeth and grew up in a space station playing checkers with pinto beans. You know, it just won't happen. Transgender people, contrary to what people might want you to think, they know what genitals and biology they were born with, who their parents are, what racial background they have, whether or not they grew up in a teepee, and they do not choose to lie about those things. Not so for those making a transracial claim. Boom, reliability, transgender 3, transracial 0. M. Monetary motive. Do we only have examples of your identity being used in vast schemes to reap financial benefit built entirely on your falsified identity? Strangely enough, it seems like every time we hear about somebody passing themselves off as a member of another race, it seems like there's a direct profit incentive. Think of Dolezal, Rachel Krug, and our crew of pretendians masquerading as different races in order to get jobs in higher academia, teaching on subjects connected to their false experiences, or getting scholarships that they shouldn't have, or lying about biographical details in books about their POC experience to add legitimacy to their story. Oli London's life is built off of direct profit around his image, outrage, and constant one-upsmanship of his outrageous claims. Treasure the White Queen did willingly go on Dr. Phil and built an outrageous and offensive YouTube account to profit off the outrage. Dolezal didn't just try to get the heat off her with her transracial claim. She pivoted into doing countless media spots, getting paid for interviews, and writing a whole-ass book in full color about her transracial claim. London, Dolezal, and Martina Big all have OnlyFans accounts, although London's is now deactivated. London and Dolezal still have active Cameo accounts, and in general, their current day-to-day income is based on the fame that they garnered from their transracial claims. There are millions and millions of trans folk, and a few of them are famous, some of them have cameos in OnlyFans. There's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. Many, however, are also content to live their lives. Pop on some 100 Gex or the Celeste OST and chow down on some Fuego Takis while playing the critically acclaimed MMO Final Fantasy XIV. Now, again, none of this is fully damning in and of itself, but again, if there were only 6 transgender people, and this was the first time they existed in recorded history, and they lied constantly about everything, and then, coincidentally, every one of them built an industry around profiting off of the outrage from their latest claim, I mean, come on, man. Boom, monetary motive, transgender 4, transracial 0. Last up, universality. Do we have reason to think that this experience could be a fundamental part of the human experience throughout time, geography, and culture? If history was asking, do we have evidence that this existed across time and space? Universality asks if the experience was a cultural blip that only could have occurred under specific circumstances, or if it's something more foundational to what it is to be a human. Let's look at the history of transgenderism across all of human recorded culture and ask ourselves, how did all these cultures come up with different cultural gender roles despite being relatively isolated by the land and sea for millennia? Could it be that anime was invented millennia before we thought it was and turned everyone trans? The honest answer is, well, it was really different for everyone. We might understand these roles to be most similar to how we understand gender, but all cultures had different roles and expectations for their members already, and when you combine it with intersex people, eunuchs, people who just had wildly different vibes and attractions and spirits, everyone found language and concepts to help identify and guide their thoughts around it differently. At its core, what we can tell is that people throughout history have presented and identified in ways wildly different than we now understand in our time and place. Some had what we could clearly recognize now as gender dysphoria, and some didn't. But when it comes to gender identities and gender roles, these conflicts and experiences seem to be a human universal. We get nothing of the sort when examining how people like Rachel Dolezal are claiming to be transracial, because the simplest thought experiment renders it absolutely unimaginable. Ask yourself, for instance, how many alpaca farmers in Teotihuacan in 500 AD woke up one morning just knowing that they were meant to be swagged out Chinese Tang soldiers crushing the Gaia Federation under their heel? Because if that person did exist, the first question their friends and family members would have is, what's China? And how many members of the Hmong tribe woke up on the edge of the Kalahari Desert in 400 BC just knowing that they were meant to be a pale-ass Saxon warrior from pre-antiquity Europe? None! Because how the fuck could they? Like Fernandez Bot says, it's unintelligible and fantastical. Boom, you, universality, transgender 5, transracial 0. Ding, 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 we have a winner. History, amount, reliability, monetary motive, and universality, all of these things together actually do give us very good reasons to treat transgender people respectfully and seriously, and people making a transracial claim unseriously. The transracial claim fares even worse when you consider that those people making the "I sexually identify as an attack helicopter" memes probably don't even have a monetary motive, because it's just a troll meant to hurt and demean transgender people, meaning that transracial falls below attack helicopter on the harm you legitimacy scale. When we look at the harm you test again, it's not a matter of valid or invalid or fake or whatever, because you can't logically destroy an unfalsifiable claim. To defer to an earlier point, the main benefit of the transracial grift is that it's unfalsifiable. It's meant to operate on your vulnerabilities as a well-meaning, progressive, kind-hearted person who wants to listen to everybody, consider all angles, and make sure no one feels invalidated. It overrides your system to destroy you and propagate itself, like that hot virus Thrax from Osmosis Jones. The whole intention of being a progressive, tolerant, kind person presupposes that the people you are interacting with are having a genuine experience and relaying it to you honestly. But sometimes you're not dealing with somebody having a genuine experience. You're dealing with white Thrax. You're dealing with Bilbo Blackface. This is a virus meant to play on your vulnerabilities and give itself as much plausible deniability as possible. So when you start engaging with it on the copy ninja, let's defend this shit, it has already won. That's fighting it on its own grounds. The only thing you can do is defuse it, rob it of its power, snip the wires, and walk in the other direction. We are past the point of no return when it comes to people having the ability to bring up transracial as a way to denigrate the transgender experience. But the tools are there to argue for treating transgender people well while not giving transracial people the time of day. So, ultimately, if somebody were to ask me what I thought of transracial people, what would I say? Psst, this is the conclusion of the video. This is the part where we bring it all together. Well, my personal opinion is that it's a scam, intentionally or unintentionally, from the people making the claim, who seem to me to all be con artists suffering from an intense personality disorder, or usually both. I'm not a doctor. I can't prove that. Maybe these people are having a real experience. I'm not sure. But what I am sure about is that we have great reasons to not treat the claim seriously, especially because we can tell that it's a claim whose origin began as a way for a con artist to shirk responsibility after being found out by trying to detach herself from the sympathy and attention earned by black people and onto the sympathy and attention earned by transgender people during their biggest moment of visibility in history. Broadly, however, there are important reasons that we have to seek to understand transgender folks better and to not spend any time, money, or attention on the, quote, transracial. Looking at history, we can see that transgender people have existed throughout all of history. Transracial people haven't and only started popping up in 2015. When it comes to the amount of them, even conservative estimates show that there are millions and millions of transgender people. And we know of like a small handful of transracial people throughout the globe. Transgender people are, by and large, honest actors seeking to live a good life on their own terms. But when it comes to almost every transracial person that we know, their life is usually filled with dozens of lies about their material reality, their biography, and their experiences, so the degree that we can even trust them to be honest about their own experience is up in the air. There are transgender people in every industry in the world, but nearly every transracial person seems to have a clear monetary motive, profiting off of interviews, public spectacle, outrage, book deals, or has previously passed themselves off as non-white in order to get scholarships, jobs, and opportunities meant for people of color before ever identifying as transracial. Finally, I just don't see this being a universal experience. Gender has existed in every culture in different contexts, but the concept of race just does not translate as easily. You can see somebody identifying as transgender in any culture, but the idea of any person feeling like they were born in the wrong race or the wrong color, it's just impossible for much of history. Could a Cherokee person have felt that they were born Japanese in pre-colonial times? No, it just doesn't translate. So yes, ultimately, I'm going to keep loving and supporting my transgender brothers and sisters and non-binary finery, and I both don't feel like and see no reason to treat transracial people seriously. I feel like doing so only helps to further anti-transgender talking points. It feels like a waste of time at best and a contribution to a transphobic scam at worst. If I want to support some fun, outrageous bullshit that isn't contributing to the widespread propagation of a transphobic brain parasite, I'll watch the Love is Blind Season 2 reunion where everyone keeps yelling at Shake to shut the fuck up, and he just will not, man. It's so good.
I'm gonna tell all. I'm gonna just say what everyone's thinking at home.
Somebody say that.
I would have done myself a big favor if I would have
Do not put me into your words at all.
If you want to talk about transracial as in the adoption experience or the experience of being mixed in America or interesting ways in which race is constructed, I'm all ears. But if even after all that, you're dead set on making me spell out for you why this isn't worth an hours-long academic sparring match in the Brain Palace, well then, you're probably not very fun at parties. I have better ways to spend my time. After all, the critically acclaimed Final Fantasy XIV has a new expansion, my bunny girl has a long way to go before hitting max level, and big bags of Fuego Takis are 2 for $4 at the grocery down the block. So, that said, what do you think? Is there something I didn't cover? Is there some angle that I'm missing? What do you think about transracial as an identity? Let me know in the comments down below because I'd love to hear your opinion. If you thought that this video was useful, then please hit that subscribe button or share it with a friend. It would mean the world to me. This video took an unbelievable amount of time and mental bandwidth to research and put together, but this topic has been haunting me forever. And I really hope that I did a decent job of putting some of this finally to rest. I have new videos like this coming out every month, and I learn a lot every time, and so I promise it'll be worth your while. Again, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.